Hi, folks. You were Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about of the senior politicians that are controlling, or supposedly anyway, in control of all the Western democracies. How many of these senior politicians are just window dressing flunkies that are put in there just to make up the numbers? You know, diversity hires, affirmative action hires, call it what you like. And how many of the senior politicians are fully controlled deep state operatives that are there to enact and implement the globalist project. So let's just have a little look at that. Now, something I've noticed in reading the accounts of various politicians that have, say, left politics and they've moved on and they're trying to set up consulting firms or work as lobbyists or whatever, which can be quite lucrative if you've got the right connections, you know, get seats on board of directors and so on. They talk about how much power, even though they're at the top table, you know, the cabinet table, the cabinet meetings, meeting in the Oval Office, or they're having the cabinet meetings in England at, you know, number 10 Downing Street, and all this sort of stuff. Now, you'd think these, if you're at that level, you'd think, well, those people are the decision-making ones. They're the ones who know. They're the ones that are making decisions. They're the ones that are making it happen. They're the ones that must be agreeing with what's going on and so on. But some of these politicians, in fact, quite a few of them, once they're out of the political game, they talk quite a convincing argument, actually, that they actually didn't know what was going on. They had an inkling, or they had a kind of an idea, but they were really stonewalled and boxed in by the small handful of people that were the fully fledged globalist implementers. And the public service and the various organs of the public service were completely controlled by the globalists. And the politicians were really just the veneer of legitimacy that these deep state public servants needed to implement the globalist project. So let's take a classic one, migration. Now, I was just looking at the numbers, and one former British politician was saying that she understood that the migration rate was between 150 and 200,000 coming into Britain in the previous 12 months. And when, as a senior politician, she tried to get verification of the numbers and breakdowns and confirmation, and to get, unbiased, impartial information supplied by the public service, which serves the people ostensibly, she found she couldn't get it, or she'd be stonewalled, or the numbers that she was given were a complete fabrication, or alternatively, some of the goons from the Prime Minister's office would come around and say, "Hey, stop asking difficult questions. You know, get on with your job and don't cause trouble. The Prime Minister can get rid of you at any time, and then you're not a senior cabinet minister anymore, and you're just a flunky on the backbench. Your salary will be cut in half. All the benefits and all the international travel and all the things that go with being a minister and being, fated as being a kick-ass sort of top drawer sort of person. All that will be gone, and it can be done. I can do it in the next 5 seconds unless you do what the fuck you're told." So there's a lot riding on it. Not just simply prestige issues, but also income. Like, on top of being a minister, maybe you also get to chair a few committees. So your income could fall from, $500,000 a year with all the bells and whistles thrown into $150,000 a year, just bang, just like that, if you don't toe the line. So there's quite a lot of power they can wield over even the most senior ministers. But if you're not in the globalist operative club, the deep state controlled small nucleus that's always at the head of these things, it may just be 3 people, then you're just filling in. You're just a piece of window dressing. You don't get to make decisions. You can't take a shit without getting permission. You're just a very well-paid, prestigious position nobody, but you're nothing, and they can get rid of you at any time, and they make that very clear to you. So, and you're not supposed to know what's going on. It's not your business to know what's going on. And if you try and find out what's going on, we'll deal with you severely. The equivalent in career terms of being taken out the back and proverbially shot. So this comes up with quite a few of these senior government ministers. When the cabinet meetings are held, the view is, I think, that the public would have is that in these cabinet meetings, the big decisions were getting made, or at the very least discussed and debated. Actually, that's not so. The last prime minister that had a cabinet meeting where people were making decisions might have been the early administration of John Major, which is going back 40 years ago in England. And if you listen to some of the meetings that the American presidents had, whether it be, I don't know, Reagan and people like that, there seemed to be, I wouldn't call it a democratic cabinet necessarily. There's still a prime minister and a chief of staff, and a president and a chief of staff, but people got to put their opinions and views and suggestions, and they had their own independent researchers that were independent of the public service that would come up with, again, policy suggestions. That doesn't seem to be the case much anymore. I think the presidency of Donald Trump is bringing that back. But once you have independent research, independent policy making, then the globalists and the deep state don't control it. And the intention on what they need to do if they're going to implement the globalist project is to have total control over every utterance, every piece of information, every policy suggestion, all research, and so on, which they can then massage and doctor and corrupt and subvert as they need to ensure that the globalist project and its priorities come first. But coming back to the cabinet meeting now, the power and decision-making power has become so centralised now in places like Britain, and we see it also in, say, France or Germany, Australia. The power is so centralised now that it's just the one or two, the few, the small handful of totally owned and globalist controlled ones that get to make all the decisions in conjunction with the deep state that's embedded in the public service. So they form like a tiny nucleus, and they're all decisions are made there. All information, what information we see and hear, the media narrative, everything is decided in that little inner sanctum. And the people on the periphery of that inner sanctum, cabinet ministers, ostensibly people, ministers responsible to the people, to the electorate, they don't know squat. They don't know shit. They're not told shit. And again, if they try and poke their nose into something, they're slapped down and told that they've got no business doing that, and they'll be out of a job quick smart unless they, again, toe the line. Now, I can sort of relate this to some extent into the private sector, where the very first time I went to report to the board of directors of this company I was working with, I was like the EVP and executive vice president, and I had to report to the board. And given that the company was, I was new there, but given the company was in trouble and had been staggering along and this sort of stuff, and I was a compromise candidate, the board of directors had broken up into like 4 separate factions, all with their own stooge boy that they wanted to put forward as the EVP. But they all ended up cancelling each other out, and I was the only independent candidate sort of in the running. So no one opposed me being appointed, but no one supported me either. I was just I sort of slipped through the cracks of all these warring factions, and they treated me accordingly, by the way. But the first time I got to the board of directors, like, this is it, I've made it. It's the very first time, and these are the decision makers. These are the dudes. These are the kick-ass. These are the guys who have a wealth of business experience. Wow, can I learn something from these guys? And I'm just but a babe in the woods here amongst giants and titans and so on. That was my thinking as I went, and I remember it vividly when I went into this first meeting. I was trembling, for goodness sakes, when I went to this first meeting, and I was only, how old would I have been? maybe 28, something like that, 29. I wasn't 30, I remember that. Anyway, so I get into the meeting and I was staggered at how these guys didn't fucking know shit. None of them had made money themselves. They'd inherited money, which is the case with quite a few of them, and inherited a lot of it, by the way. The others that had made any money were just spending all the time flipping real estate, residential real estate. None of them had made money. You know, they weren't business people that had innovated or invented something or had run a tight shit business that had kicked ass and made a lot of. None of them kicked that. I knew more than any and all of them put together. And I remember my shock at realizing that and realizing how much decisions weren't actually made there, and decisions were done so casually and in a seat of the pants type thing that I couldn't. I had no idea. I thought we'd discuss the details of it. We'd get into the weeds of it. There'd be serious policy consideration. There was nothing of the fucking sort, and I was surprised by that they were all just political hacks that were appointed because they came from the money established set. They were well connected into the financial sort of sector, and they were put forward as useful sort of placeholders and flunkies and stooges for the boys in the finance sector, who are the ones who really, at the end of the day, pulled the strings. And they, again, were just appointing their flunky buddies into these roles. So that surprised me. That again, now since then, I've met other boards of directors, reported to them, dealt with them, and the quality is about the same. Maybe there's a small range of variance, but given so many of them are just political goon placeholders and flunkies, even though you say, and Billy Bob's worked for the Grand National Bank for 25 years and has been the CEO of this and the fucking managing director of that. So wow, hey, Billy Bob's really well credentialed and he went to Harvard and whatever. But once you sit down and talk to Billy Bob, you realize he doesn't know squat. He's just been a journeyman flunky that's been appointed in there, patronage, cronyism, call it what you like, but cronyism and the crony economy being the biggest aspect of this. But that's what they were. So you can relate this to boards to cabinet members. Many of them have been picked to repay political favours because a major donor says, "Well, I want Jimmy Jack in the inner sanctum," and so on. But particularly, it's the inner sanctum, the inner of the inner sanctum, if you like. They're just globalist stooges. So that when a politician says, "Well, they told me there was going to be 150,000 immigrants coming in. In fact, there was 1.2 million, like a million more than they said." And the lies and the information they gave was just so full of holes and so vague and so full of bullshit. And yet the deep state public service thing was completely controlled, by the globalists and by the couple of two or three, fully embedded, controlled and owned globalist stooges. So the information of what's really happening only goes to those who are globalist controlled and thus who can be trusted. Now, it may be, anyone that is in those, the cabinet or whatever, who thinks, well, I represent the people. They're just not globalist. They're just not globalist enough. You don't represent the fucking people, you idiot. You are loyal to, are controlled by, and will receive your orders from the globalist cabal. And if you doubt that, just try and give me some back chat, and you'll find what happens to you, motherfucker. And so this is very much part of the scenario and the scene there. That the rest of these politicians who are not fully globalist controlled are, again, just window dressing. They're not really told much. The public service that supposedly is responsive or meant to be responsive to the elected representatives of the people, just ignore them. No, fuck off. I'm a globalist. I don't have anything to do with you. You idiot, thinking you represent the people. And that is so yesterday. The people have no say in what's going on here. And this surprised, the extent of it sort of surprised me. And again, these politicians come out of it, when they leave politics, they realise, or got to some point where they realised the extent to which they were being lied to and obfuscated and cheated like the voting public. And they had a better access to information, of course, than just some sort of ordinary Joe wandering around the streets. But they when they would try and verify or check, then there was no mechanism they had to actually nail down the real numbers or what was really going on. That was completely controlled again by the globalists, the embedded globalist controllers. That so say in the case of Boris Johnson's administration, for example. Now, Boris Johnson was seen as a bit of a gadfly. He was elected by the people with a very substantial majority to stop the globalisation process. And instead, he not only did he not stop it, he put it into high gear and brought in a gazillion fucking third world peasants and patted himself on the back for it. But the people around him, not many of them actually knew the extent of what was going on, and the same sort of continued. So when people like, say, former short-term Prime Minister Liz Truss, for example, is recently doing a speaking tour or interview tour, and she's saying, well, really, even as a senior minister, the real situation wasn't being explained to us. It was only a few people and the cabinet secretary, the public, the senior public servants that controlled all that, and only they knew what was going on or the extent of it, and the rest of us were kept in the dark. So now, when you're a senior minister of the Crown, in the case of Britain, and you're treated as if you're, some sort of, flunky administration clerk operating in the outer office, then something is wrong with democracy. You don't need to explain. The representatives of the people have no say in what's going on. I mean, are you kidding me? But that's where we're at all across the Western world. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback Channel, and thank you for listening.